Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Sanghaṃ Namasami. Blessings to you all. Every morning in the monastery we chant a verse of Dhamma, which begins, "Now let us chant a salutation to the triple gem and a passage to arouse Saṃvega." It's a good way to start the day. Salutation to the triple gem, or acknowledging the Buddha, our teacher, and the wisdom and compassion of the Buddha. Acknowledging the Dhamma, the truth, and the teachings and the path that point to the truth. Acknowledging the Sangha, those who have practiced and realized the truth, following in the path of the Buddha. But then this word Saṃvega is not always immediately obvious to people practicing Buddhism. It's not a word that's readily translated into English. Sometimes it's translated as a sense of urgency. Sometimes as a sense of sadness, they say sobering sadness, waking up to the truth of the way things are, recognizing that life is mixed up with suffering and stress. Sometimes it's translated as spiritual emotion or spiritual agitation. I think they put in the word spiritual to kind of make you think it's a good thing. So in the teachings of Buddhism, it is considered a positive, wholesome, skillful state of mind, even though they use the words urgency or sadness or even agitation. The root of the word partly means to uplift or get up, point upwards. So that's where you get the sense of urgency. Having seen the way things are, awoken to the way things are, then the mind wants to get up and do something about it. So there's a sense of urgency is stimulated. And the chant, you'll see from the chanting book, is pointing out, very similar to what we just chanted in the Dhammacakka Sutta. The Buddha explaining the Four Noble Truths and what dukkha is and what is the cause and what is the path leading to the end of dukkha. And this is based partly on his own personal story, which we're all very familiar with, being brought up in the palace, the wealth, the comfort of one of northern India's ruling families, destined to become the next ruler. But his father, who was quite smart, sheltering him from dukkha because he also realized that his son had, we say, spiritual ambitions, or was just very attuned to the way things are and sharp and clear-minded. And his father didn't want to give any excuse to go and pursue the holy life, the spiritual life, the practice of meditation. He wanted to keep him happily comfortable. So whether you say, well, that's his father doing that, or you just say it's also just our human desire, isn't it? We all want comfort, convenience, pleasure, and don't want to be bothered with the trials and tribulations and sufferings of the world. But his father was there to kind of ensure that for his son, the Bodhisattva. But the Bodhisattva nevertheless went out and discovered things that we call suffering. So people who are sick, people getting old, people dying, and then dead people. Perhaps it backfired, his father's plan, because when you're coming from a place of comfort, convenience, pleasure, not encountering any kind of stress or suffering, then when you do, perhaps it makes all the bigger impression on the mind. So for the Buddha to be the Bodhisattva, this is where we say Dhamma Saṃvega arose, a sense of opening up, awakening to the truth, and the mind sobering up, and also seeing the sadness of life, recognizing that. No longer fully deluded or kind of in a fairy tale, make-believe world, but we're opening up just the way things are. So you can see obviously the comparison with this day and age, where if you look at any kind of news or TV or news show, it's all about the number of coronavirus victims and the number of deaths and the struggles with lockdown and restrictions and the effects that the current pandemic is having on the world and people. That's our wake-up call. That's our call to Samvega, and could be, we could be following in the Buddha's footsteps here, waking up to the true nature of reality as a human being, is that we are subject to aging, sickness and death, and there's no way around that. But from the Buddha's story, another part of the story is that having encountered aging, sickness and death, he then was already thinking, what is the way out of this, or is there a way out of this? And he saw a samana, a monk walking through the town collecting alms. And that monk symbolizes the way out. And the quality that often accompanies Saṃvega, the sense of urgency to practice, is pasada, which means like luminosity or clarity of mind. Again, another positive quality. It's a wholesome quality, and it comes together with Saṃvega, because it's like you've identified that there is a sadness, there's a suffering in life, but then there's also identifying that there's a way out. You could say the way of hope. There is hope. There is a solution to this. The samana, the monk, symbolizes that, and the mind brightens, clarity is gained, the mind becomes lucid, if only temporarily. So they go together. So in this day and age, probably the thing to do would be, when you listen to the news, the latest problems with the pandemic, then straight afterwards turn on a Dhamma talk and you will fulfill the same conditions for the arising of Saṃvega and then pasada as the Buddha encountered and developed in his own practice. What happens if we don't turn to the Dhamma? The Saṃvega can quickly turn into depression and feeling of hopelessness and a sense of just giving up. Oh, it's too difficult. The world, the pandemic, the problems of the world, the economic problems, the social problems, the health problems, whether it's your own individual problems or just looking at society, it can just seem hopeless and overwhelming. And that's not Saṃvega, and that's not pasada. That's depression, negativity, anxiety, fear, anguish maybe, despair. That's the opposite of Saṃvega and pasada. So if that's what you're experiencing, that's why you turn to the Dhamma, and you turn the Dhamma on when you're experiencing the anguish or the fear and the worry about pandemic and how it's affecting you and your life, or even just other people's lives, because nowadays we hear about people all over the world, and sometimes that in itself is overwhelming when you hear about the sufferings, maybe more extreme suffering than you're experiencing. Just hearing it can be very sad and then overwhelming. But the Buddha, by example, said, well, don't just get stuck in the sadness of it and become depressed. We have to uplift ourselves and channel that realization that there is dukkha and suffering in the world into the practice, into the way of practice that leads out of dukkha, following the Eightfold Path. So it's quite a common thing. People do come to want to learn meditation or study Buddhism, practice Buddhism, because they've had maybe a lot of stress, very stressful experience in their life, so maybe some big crisis, and that's brought them into Buddhism. Probably more common is just waking up to the more ordinary level of stress and suffering of daily life, but just waking up a bit to it, recognizing that we have a lot of discontent. Our minds are not that peaceful, and it's seemingly at the drop of the hat. At any moment you can be caught out by your own mind and be plunged into depression or anguish, fear, anxiety, disappointment, discontent. Just noticing that, and often to do with very ordinary things, just dissatisfaction with one's physical well-being, when we do get ill or have injuries, aches and pains, dissatisfaction with our job, the people around us, our partner, our family. Dissatisfaction can include worry and anxiety about them as much as actual aversion. But just noticing that, often is the wake-up call over and over again. And then one says, oh, I'm getting so stressed. Now is the time. I must find a way out of this. And maybe we start learning meditation. So this word dukkha and stress covers, from the very minor, ordinary kinds of irritations and dissatisfactions in life, right through to the big crisis of life-threatening diseases and disaster. Covers everything, and just the nature of this world that is subject to change, and it's not completely reliable, leads human beings to want to find something that is reliable, that is something that they can feel, they can find security, safety and peace in. Our teacher Ajahn Chah also had this same sort of opening up to Samvega, even as a child. As a child and then a teenager, he had, from his recollections, he had clear understanding of the sufferings of life, because he was brought up in a very poor family, rice farming family, where they had to work hard even as a child and deal with a lot of difficult physical hardship and difficulty. So he was already aware of that, and these perhaps, we say, is accumulated barami, wisdom, understanding from past lives led him already to seek out the monastery as a child, and as a teenager he voluntarily went to live in his local monastery for a number of years. That's what we call a dekwat, a child of the monastery, serving the monastery and the Sangha, but also hearing Dhamma and participating in skillful activities from a young age, voluntarily. But he wasn't completely convinced or committed to the monastic life yet. He tried the life of a novice monk, and then he went back to his family and still had some hopes for the world, hopes to get married, which were quickly dashed when his best friend took the girl that he thought he might marry. And then thinking about a life ahead as a rice farmer and the difficulties that would involve, brought him into the monastery a second time. And he said even as a young monk, the first couple of years as a monk, he wasn't fully committed yet. He hadn't sort of fully realized the value of the life, but he obviously had an inkling of it. But he was studying the scriptures but didn't yet do much meditation. And that changed when his father became very sick and was close to death, and he left his studies at a difficult time because he was about to take exams. He thought, go and visit my father is more important because he may not last very long. So he went back to his father, who actually had very strong faith in Buddhism and had supported forest monks, meditation monks before. And his father on his deathbed invited his own son to stay a monk, not to disrobe. And Ajahn Chah, perhaps, the young Ajahn Chah, in the right state of mind, seeing that his father was about to die, had that Saṃvega, this sobering sadness and waking up to the realities of life. And he said, why would I disrobe? So he obviously had enough insight at that time to commit fully to the monk's life and also the life of meditation and training for Nibbana, for the ending of suffering. And we can all say that. We can say the words, I'm going to practice for the end of suffering. But it's when Saṃvega arises and then pasada, clarity, seeing the way out and wanting to commit to it. And that's when that really gels in the mind. So Ajahn Chah said from that point on, there was no turning back, as it were. And after his father passed away and he helped with the funeral, then he left his studies and went off wandering in the forest to find an enlightened teacher to teach him meditation, which eventually led him to meet with Lumpur Man and Lumpur Tongrat, Lumpur Ginari, who were his main teachers. But you can see whether it's the life of the Buddha or life of Ajahn Chah or from our own practice, there are these often just small moments of realization, waking up to the truth of life. It may be just when you read the news or turn on the news every night. It's just a reminder, oh yes, aging, sickness and death is all around. Suffering is all around. And it brings you back to the Dhamma with that sense of clarity, and I want to practice, I know why I want to practice. And it's the arising of some wisdom as well, some right view. And you gain something from that. It starts to inform your values and what you see as important in life, what matters, and that there is something that matters in life, because part of Saṃvega is also realizing that life is an endless round of suffering, aging, sickness and death, disappointments, not getting what you want, getting what you don't want, all the things we define as dukkha can give you a great sense of meaningless, that life is meaningless, going nowhere. But then seeing the Dhamma, recognizing the Dhamma, hearing the Dhamma goes in the other way, doesn't it? It gives a sense of there is a purpose to life, there's some value here, and there are qualities and things to be developed. The knowledge, the understanding of the Dhamma is to be developed and realized. The end of suffering is to be realized. And that's one of the amazing things of the Dhamma, is that you're turning the dukkha of the world, or in your own experience, into something useful, into something good. Just like using fertilizer, as we talk about. Today somebody offered durian, which is a reflection in itself in the monastery, to be offered durian, which is not a native fruit to Australia, but to offer durian in a time of pandemic just shows you we're not suffering that much if they can still offer durian. Life is not that bad, maybe, even though it's bad for some people, some individuals. Generally, society hasn't collapsed yet if they can still offer durian in the mountains and forests of southern Australia. But durian traditionally is a very smelly fruit, And one of the ways they fertilize it is put dead dogs. When a dog dies, the farmer puts the body at the foot of the durian tree. Not to make the durian smell of dead dog, but just to make it nutritious. As you know, any kind of fertilizer tends to come from dead bodies or horse poo or bat guano or from chicken poo. Or you tend to take the smelly dead things of the world and use it to fertilize not just durian but any other kind of plant. And the Dhamma is the same. It's taking the dukkha of life but turning it into something that actually purifies us by understanding and knowing it for what it is, and then looking at how to overcome it by removing the causes of dukkha. It's the same sort of principle. Sometimes they compare it to the coconut palm. You see a coconut palm and it draws up the nutrition and the water and muddy water from the earth, and it goes right up the stem of this palm, which can be very high, 10 meters, 15 meters, maybe even 20 meters high, and goes into creating sweet coconut with its sweet flesh, and then this nice coconut water that they sell. That comes from the mud and the mess of the earth underneath, and then the Dhamma is the same. We take the dukkha of the world, but by wisely reflecting on it, contemplating it, and developing skillful qualities of mind, we turn it into something pure. The pure mind, the mind that is not deluded, it's no longer fooled by the world. The glossy adverts, the images, all that kind of imagination that tanha, craving, tricks us with, telling us it's all going to be good and you can get this and you'll be happy, and then that will happen and you'll get this and life will be just good. Seeing through that, the maturity of the mind, using the power of mindfulness and wisdom and insights, realizes, well, that's not true. Taking the mind to a higher place. It's a purification process, isn't it? Taking dukkha and turning into non-dukkha. What's the opposite of dukkha? Well, sukha. But you might say dhamma, happiness, coming from wisdom, understanding and developing skillful qualities of mind. But the process, getting from A to B, from dukkha to sukha, from dukkha to the dhamma, turning it from dukkha into Saṃvega, and then pasada, and then practicing the Eightfold Path. There's a bit of time there where there may be doubt still, uncertainty. The mind can still be shaken out of its clarity back to a doubt about the world and back to dukkha. And they say it's even possible, even when you develop some peace of mind through meditation, some states of peace, samadhi, doubt can still arise, and the refined and subtle piece of the mind of samadhi, doubt can still emerge out of it, like the weeds can re-emerge, the clouds can come back into the beautiful clear sky, and the mind thinks, well, maybe I need to go back and explore tanha a bit more, go back to the mind of craving, and forgetting that it will lead to more suffering. Can still happen. So the Buddha said we can't just rely on virtuous qualities, the qualities of kindness, compassion, generosity, and in mindfulness and samadhi alone. It has to all be balanced and supported by wisdom and insight, so that we don't get careless and slip back from whatever spiritual peace and happiness we've gained, and start doubting and wanting to taste the world of tanha again, go back into the troubles of attachment and craving. We have to keep being vigilant, heedful, develop wisdom at all times. So that just in the same way as the Buddha, he left his comfortable life and studied with the foremost meditation masters of the day and developed states of samadhi that at that time was considered the greatest happiness and peace a human being can experience. But he wasn't satisfied with it. He wasn't complacent. He was careful. And he considered maybe this is, but maybe it's not. What Ajahn Chah used to say, it's not certain. Is it certain or not? And you always have that little bit of the mind that says it's not certain, it's not sure. Let's see, is there more to spiritual happiness than this? The mind that is peaceful. Is this real, unshakable, permanent peace, clarity, purity, or is there still room for doubt and uncertainty for the mind to slip back? So whether it's the Buddha going on to practice under the Bodhi tree or Ajahn Chah contemplating, it's not sure. There has to be that drive, the curiosity and interest to take the practice a bit further and to keep investigating and looking. They say Ajahn Chah, when he had this Saṃvega arise and he decided to really put his heart into the practice after his father passed away. He was already a monk, so it wasn't like he wasn't practicing, but he said he really turned to commit to the practice at that point. And he went off into the forest to meditate. And they say when he left home that time, quite naturally a Bodhi tree sprang up at the steps leading up onto his house. It's a wooden house, as they have in northeast Thailand, on stilts. And a Bodhi tree just spontaneously grew, and they grow very fast in the tropics, not like here in Warburton where it takes years and years. In the tropics they grow very fast, so within a few weeks this Bodhi tree was sprouting, growing quite high already. So his mother had an inkling this is something auspicious. She also had had a dream at that time. She lost 2 teeth, but then she gained some gold teeth. Gold teeth, I think, symbolized the enlightened mind, perhaps, of her son. But having the auspicious dream and this inkling that this Bodhi tree is like a good omen, a good sign, she carefully dug it up and took it to the monastery. It's like, the seeds of enlightenment were planted with this experience of seeing his father die and realizing there really is no point in life other than to practice for enlightenment. It led Luang Por Chah off into the forest to seek teachers and to really commit to the practice and training in meditation. And so you could say every time you hear a bit more news about the pandemic, another bit of suffering, another problem, it's like another little seed going into your mind. If you turn it into Dhamma and you stop and you pause, establish mindfulness and you reflect on the Dhamma at that point, and that's another cause for urging you on, like a voice urging you on to keep coming back to the practice. If you let your mind go into despair, then, you probably just look for those more worldly ways, sensual ways of getting you out of despair. Another drink, another drug, another movie, another something to kind of block away, blot it out. But it's not really very satisfying, is it? Not long and you're back with dukkha again, back with agitation, doubt, worry, anxiety, fear. The way of the Dhamma is going the other way. It's saying, okay, there's these problems, but to be patient with them and put forth effort. And the way the Buddha taught is a way of effort. But that has to be your own effort, summoning up your own effort to go back. Put more effort into practicing generosity, letting go of some of your attachment, to your material things that you worry so much about. Put more effort into practicing, developing virtuous qualities of kindness, contentment, letting go. This kind of mind of somebody who keeps precepts or practices in a virtuous way, they experience the mind of non-regret, committing to not doing or saying things that you'll regret. It takes effort to do that. So however angry I'll get, I'm not going to take it out on someone else. However greedy and selfish I feel, I'm not going to exploit others, take it out on them. However much desire I have, I'm not going to do something I'll regret. Committing to that as a path is the skillful response to suffering. Committing to the practice of mindfulness, putting effort into developing mindfulness. So listening to Dhamma, practicing meditation. This is, you might say, the skillful response to another round of dukkha, rather than giving into the craving and ultimately making things worse, and going in the other way, the way of making things better, improving your state of mind, not being dragged down to the state of depression and unhappiness, or not staying there very long, but making the effort to pull your mind out of it through the practice. This is how the Buddha and our teachers have dealt with their own suffering. It's not like they didn't have any suffering or we have more suffering than them. They had just as much suffering to encounter as we did, because they're all human beings. It's not like in the time of the Buddha they didn't have pandemics, or they did. They had plagues and they probably had less medicine and less help. There wasn't organised government and hospitals in the way we have. Even Ajahn Chah didn't have much medical help. Many times he was ill in the forest with dysentery, malaria. Sometimes he was so ill he was almost passing out. There's that occasion when he saw a deer, and it just struck him, the animals in the forest don't have medicine, they don't have doctors, hospitals, but they can survive, so if they can do it, I can do it. If we don't have to go to that extreme, we do have medicines, vaccines, doctors, hospitals. We're luckier than Ajahn Chah was. So it's not that they didn't have any dukkha, but they were willing to learn from their dukkha, go through it, treat it as something to be learnt from. Lessons have to be learnt, and with that sense of urgency, and then bringing forth effort to the practice. And it worked, and they're the proof, it works. We're still in the course of our practice. It takes time, so we have to go through this ups and downs with the mind. One moment peaceful and all good and inspired. Saṃvega has led to pasada, has led to effort, has led to clarity, insight. And then suddenly around the corner, another bit of craving or attachment can come up and catch us off guard. And we realise our mind is still a bit, is not yet unshakable, it's still shakeable. Some bit of worldly wind comes along, someone criticises us, or we have some pain or discomfort, or we don't get what we want, we fail in something, the deal didn't happen, the thing we were hoping for doesn't come through, and back to square one. That's because we haven't yet gelled the practice in the same way as the Buddha or Ajahn Chah. One aspect is lacking. You meet with the problem and you go into a rage or a period of complaining and negativity, which may be a nice, pleasant release at that moment, but leaves a nasty taste in the mouth, doesn't it? It leaves regret. When we let off our rage and our negativity, take it out on someone else, maybe a temporary release, but the residue is that we have a mind that is not peaceful anymore. We've lost our mindfulness, more anger has been triggered maybe, and we're holding on to that. We lose our empathy, so then our relations with other people tend to suffer when we give in to anger. That's where we have to go back to square one and be willing to practice again. Or the other way with desire. You give in to the dissatisfaction and just follow that selfish desire, take what you want, get what you want for a while. I'm going to get it, I'm going to enjoy it. But then you're still left with more craving, because craving knows no limits, and a mind that's not peaceful. And then you just feel regret again. Oh, I indulged. Whatever it is that you indulge in when you have a lot of desire. And you feel regret, you feel bad. feel weak, feel ashamed, feel whatever way it comes up, and you're back to square one again. Oh, that's because we haven't yet completed the path. We have to go back and start again. So we have to learn how to keep picking ourselves up, but go back to see the suffering and try and look at it with the mind of mindfulness and wisdom and say, this suffering it is sad, isn't it? The way we suffer as human beings. We suffer, other people suffer. It's not like we're special. When we suffer, we tend to think we're special, and that at that moment we're the only one suffering in the world. So we have that big word comes up, my problems, my suffering, my anguish, my desire, my weaknesses. It's my, me, mine, myself. And we forget about other people. But other people have exactly the same problem. It's just when suffering comes up, we lose our empathy. But as soon as we establish a bit of mindfulness and clarity, empathy arises because we realize, everyone else is going through the same problem. So as we put effort into establishing the mind of mindfulness, wisdom, awakening the mind to the truth, empathy arises straight away, compassion arises, because we realize they have a body too, they feel pain just like I do, they experience disappointment just like I do, they experience anguish, frustration just like I do. That helps, doesn't it? When you practice a bit of compassion, your own problems are put in perspective and they're kind of reduced a bit. And you realize the commonality of some of these experiences. So kindness and compassion arises. True compassion is like that, when you're putting yourself in the mix, so it's not just worried, anxious about other people, you're also worried about yourself. Not just taking other people as important, you're also seeing you're important as well. Because ultimately we can only solve suffering from this person, but it does bring us to compassion where we recognize the suffering in others as well. But you can only recognize from your own experience. You think, feel for yourself. You don't know exactly what other people are thinking or feeling. You can sense it as you become more aware and your mind opens up to the truth a bit. You can sense other people suffering, but really you only know for sure your own feelings, your own thoughts and perceptions, which is why the Buddha said you have to work from the inside out. But as the mind becomes more attuned to your own suffering, then you do become more sensitive to the suffering of the world, and empathy is a natural result. If we don't give up in the practice, we don't stop, then gradually the mind becomes clearer and clearer, and it doesn't want to give in to suffering and the causes of suffering anymore. Even when there is suffering, the mind doesn't want to go there with reactions of aversion, disappointment, depression, despair. Because the mind knows, it's just compounding the whole problem, making it worse, making it last longer, and going in the wrong direction. Because the more we attach to dukkha as self, as me, mine, myself, the worse we make it. We double it, triple it, double dukkha, triple dukkha, quadruple dukkha, zillion times dukkha if you want to say it that way. Now we're in the world of numbers, aren't we? How many cases today, how many cases overall, who's got it? It's all about numbers. Well, dukkha is the same if you want to look at it that way. Today I quadrupled my dukkha by just giving into my craving and attachment over and over again, making it worse. But we can also go the other way and say, well, I quadrupled my peace and mindfulness and clarity by putting effort into the practice. And I had longer periods where my mind seemed calm, and I understood dukkha is to be known and craving is to be abandoned. I understood that many more times today because I put effort into my practice. It's only logical one day it's going to actually you'll get to the point where all that craving attachment is finally abandoned, reduced to the point where it doesn't return. That's what we call an enlightenment. Often we think enlightenment, nibbana, is something you have to gain or get. And that becomes a basis for craving and greed again. Greed for what we call spiritual greed, where we want to get certain experiences, we want to be the one who knows, we want to get enlightened, have enlightenment as our own experience. Usually accompanied by the thought, oh, I can tell my friends about it. So we want to tell everyone how good it is. But true enlightenment is not to be gained like that. It's not something you get or attain. It's something that comes about quite naturally by removing what is not enlightenment, removing craving and attachment. So it's only logical if you keep removing, letting go of craving attachment, then the mind is going to gradually get closer to nibbana. But you have to have the patience and the willingness and the effort to keep doing that. And that's where we need the patience and endurance that the Buddha had, that Luang Por Chah had. And now they're calling the pandemic a war. We're going to fight this war. And it is a war, but it's not a war on pandemic, because then it tends to come out as, war against COVID, war against anyone else who's got COVID, war against whoever brought COVID to here, war against lockdown. We tend to misinterpret it. Really, the war is against delusion, our own attachment that feeds delusion and is fed by delusion. That's the war. When we give in to craving attachment, that's where we need to rise up again, develop Saṃvega and go back to the practice and bring up, with effort, bring up the qualities that the Buddha encouraged. The real war is internal. It's not out there, it's inside, against our own craving, complacency, sleepiness, dullness, drowsiness, depression, and so on. That's where we have to work hard, not to give in to it, not to become a slave to it. That's the real COVID war, it's internal. But Luang Por Chah and many, many other monks, nuns, men, women since the time of the Buddha have proven this is a war that can be won, and it's not a destructive war. It doesn't lead to any casualties in terms of people or property. It's a war that leads to just peace and wisdom. So maybe I'll leave you with these reflections tonight, and may you all be safe and find happiness in your practice.